started now. I know everyone here listening in person and also at home, we all have different views about God. So I just want to speak for myself and say thank you to God for bringing us all together and for this opportunity tonight. Thank you also to all of you for joining us, and thank you to everyone joining from home. So we're here at the Community Church of Boston, an institution that has a history of over 100 years. In the past 100 years, as many of you know, and as some of you might not know, we've had a very remarkable history, I would say. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke with the church, W.E.B. Du Bois, Rosa Parks, just to name a few, Daniel Ellsberg, the list goes on. So I just want to share that so you all may be a little bit more familiar with this church. We have a very special event tonight, and the format of the event is going to be split up into 3 parts, basically. The first part will be our guest speaker, Mr. Dennis Fritz. He'll be speaking about his book, Deadly Betrayal. The second part, Mr. Fritz and his friend and colleague, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, will be speaking together in discussion. And then the third part of the evening will be a question and answer session with our audience in-house. And there'll be a few announcements in between. So without further delay, we're going to get started. Our 2 guest speakers today traveled a long distance and made time in their busy schedules to speak with us. So we're very grateful and fortunate to hear from them. Mr. Dennis Fritz is a retired member of the United States Air Force, where he had a long storied career serving our country. And during that time, he achieved different ranks, including Command Chief Master Sergeant. He's also the author of the book Deadly Betrayal, The Truth About Why the U.S. Invaded Iraq. And actually, he also worked in the Department of Defense, where he had access to very high-level classified documents from the top Iraq war planners, people like Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld. And that experience informed him and allowed him to write the book, which is the subject of our event tonight. As I mentioned, later on in the evening, he'll be joined in discussion with his friend and colleague, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Mr. Wilkerson is a retired colonel of the United States Army. He also has a long and storied career of serving our country in many different capacities. As I mentioned, he was retired colonel of the United States Army, and he's probably best known for being the chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. So without further delay, I'm going to pass the floor to Dennis Fritz, who I'm very honored to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. And it's so honored to be here. I thank each and every one of you for being here, and to the Community Church of Boston. It's absolutely an honor for me to be here. When I was first asked to come, I couldn't believe you were calling Dennis Fritz. You know, when I heard about some of the previous guests that have been here, especially when I heard, Martin Luther King years ago. And then most recently, when I heard my good friend Larry Wilkerson had to come before you. And in fact, I had an opportunity, I watched that particular presentation from home. And so I got a chance to listen to that. You know, one of the things I shared with Larry, I said, hey, okay, Larry, go into this. One of the rules of engagement on this, because I almost had to call Larry on his phone and say, hey, there will be no cursing. We're in church here now, so we're not going to do any cursing, no matter how mad and frustrated we get at the world and what's going on today in our United States of America foreign policy and just the geopolitical aspect of the world right now. So Omar has given you some quick background about me. I spent some 28 years in our United States Air Force. I will tell you right now, I didn't join because I was so patriotic. I joined because I wanted to be a part of the middle class. And that was one of the ways for me to get into the middle class during those days for us to join the military. And I joined the military, and I must tell you, though it was not from a patriotic perspective, it was an economic perspective, I got to tell you, I'm glad I did, because I've learned so much And if I had not been a part of the military, I would not be here today to discuss something that's truly dear to my heart, and that is the book I wrote, Deadly Betrayal. Now, let's get into why I wrote the book. As I was on active duty, as like most of us, when 9/11 happened, I was deeply concerned. What in the world has happened? We've been attacked, not since Pearl Harbor, if you will. And I didn't really know what was going on, didn't know the reason why, who did it, why. But at the same time, I think we all came together, as patriots. We wanted so-called at the time, the Bush administration sold it. We wanted revenge. We wanted to go after who attacked us at that particular moment. And I must tell you, I was all for that. But then I started seeing deployment orders for Iraq. What is that about? Why are we going to Iraq? What do they have to do with 9/11? And a lot of the young troops were coming to me and their families. Hey, Chief, I was the leader of the enlisted group, and so why are we going to Iraq? I had no answer for them, and I just couldn't live with the fact, well, we're following the orders of our leaders, our commander in chief. We're going to, guess what? As we are indoctrinated through all our military lives, we're going to defend America. Okay, but I have not heard anything about Iraq attacking us. Why? I decided to retire because of the fact I just couldn't see myself sending young troops off the war in something I didn't believe in and didn't know why. Normally, we know a true mission. It just bothered me, this thing about weapons of mass destruction. So what? We have plenty of weapons of mass destruction, and so why are we going to war because of some country we don't like and they have weapons of mass destruction? And so I retired and feeling that I'll never know why we truly was going to war in Iraq. But little did I know divine intervention would hit. As I was making my way through what we call when we leave the military, the civilian world, I just didn't seem happy because I love being with the young men and women, not just from a military standpoint of fighting a war, but being with them and molding them into be great men and women and citizens of our United States. And I missed that. As I tried to find myself after leaving the military for 28 years, I had a good friend of mine working in the Pentagon and say, hey, Fritz, you need to come back to the Pentagon as a civilian. I said, no, I don't want no part of that because I want to talk against the Iraq war. And he said, no, we need you, and I think it's something that would be fulfilling for you. And little did I know, I'll be working under the guidance of an individual, you may have heard that name before, of Doug Feith, the person that we call the architect of the Iraq war, one of the main instigators of the war. And in that job, I just heard a few minutes ago, Daniel Ellsberg, had been before you or before. The Pentagon Papers. Now, I will tell you, as I tell folks, I was no Daniel Ellsberg, but I had exposure to the type of documents that he did. And but I wanted to do it in my own way. I was part of a declassification review team to go over every piece of documentation that led up to the Iraq war. Now, you would probably say something that was based on a lie, which I've confirmed myself. A lot of us really felt there was a lie, but I confirmed myself to go on all these documents. Why would anybody leave a paper trail? And that was one of the questions I asked. In fact, you'll see it in the book. One of my, coworkers at the time, was only 5 of us on this team. I say we were not doing any cursing, so we're not going to do any cursing. It's okay. But this one individual, I remember him saying, these effing idiots left a paper trail. And he was right. And I couldn't figure out why would they do that. And I come to find out Rumsfeld, I must admit, I was no fan of Rumsfeld, but I must admit he believed in the National Archives, keeping record of everything they were doing. That was number one, why there was a paper trail. And then number two, he wanted to know who said what and when they said that. And he wanted a record of that. He always wanted to know who said what as we were going to venture into this war. And so leaving that was a paper trail. And because of the fact, as I started seeing the deaths in Iraq, the deaths in Afghanistan, and when no weapons of mass destruction was ever found, I decided, the true story needed to be told. And as part of that team, when I mentioned Doug Feith, you heard the term, they cherry picked the intel, to go to war. Well, what I found that Doug Feith, and if you don't know who Doug Feith is, Doug Feith was the #3 guy in the Pentagon at the time. And so he carried a lot of weight there. And he was one of the main drivers of us going into Iraq. He decided to cover himself and others. He was going to write a book. And part of our team was to assist him in writing that book. And I said, this guy is going to tell a bunch of lies. And it came to fruition. I started watching him cherry picking which documents we were going to declassify. And so as we declassified documents and he was taking his notes, guess what? I was taking my notes to tell the truth. And I said I was no Daniel Ellsberg. As some of you know the history, he released documents, but I wasn't going to do that. I was going to do it in a way as we declassified documents, the story they were not going to tell. I was going to tell that story of where they were lying. And some of you will see in the book, you're going to see some blackened portions of the book. That's called redactions. So that should tell you something right now. Our government is still hiding things, from the Iraq War. They're still hiding things that they prevented me, from saying and documenting. But that's okay. And the reason I can live with that, because it didn't take away my story as a whole. What it did, it hid names to protect the so-called innocent, if you will, to protect those certain meetings that Donald Rumsfeld, hey, I want to know who said what in what meeting. But some of those things were redacted out, and some things about numbers of deaths. If the American people knew at the time the number of deaths that were happening, we probably would have had more people in the streets. So they were trying to hide those, and they're still trying to hide those. Now, reason I decided to write my book after seeing Doug Feith cherry picking intel to write his book, I originally wrote the book on behalf of the men and women of our armed forces. And that's when I came up with the title Deadly Betrayal. Because you must understand, 4,500 men and women lost their lives based on a lie. And you ready for this? We all now know, on behalf of Israel. On behalf of Israel. It wasn't about oil. It wasn't about revenge of Daddy Bush, George H.W. Bush. It wasn't about Halliburton, even though they benefited from it, and a lot of other contractors benefited from it. But the sole reason was on behalf of Israel. And that disappointed me. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least do my part in joining this crusade and keeping us out of future wars that put the men and women of our armed forces at risk. Because you got to remember, those that died, their family members never were able to get them back again. But I also wrote it too because millions, and you'll be surprised when you say, well, millions, not thousands, but millions were wounded for life. Not just necessarily physically, but mentally. Mentally. They would have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, for the rest of their lives for some of the things they saw, and even worse, some of the things they did. Now, as part of me writing the book and working in the Pentagon with the #3 guy leading the Pentagon, I left the Pentagon in 2008 for another journey. I was contacted by a former boss of mine because I always said, we sent these troops off the war based on a lie. We better take care of them. I grew up in a town, Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty, if anything, if anybody followed the military, when Trump came in, decided we're going to change the names of some military bases, and we changed it back. So I grew up in a town in Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg. And I saw a lot of Vietnam veterans coming back, wounded mentally. And that vision stayed with me forever. And I didn't want that, us not taking care of our men and women, especially sent off a war that was based on a lie. So I was called to, and a lot of you heard of this hospital, the Walter Reed Medical Center. And I was assigned to take care of airmen who were coming back from that war to make sure their non-medical needs were taken care of, to make sure they got their full benefits, to make sure their families were taken care of. And as I saw all those wounded coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, it even drove me more to say, I need to write this book. Why? Because I would ask them, why do you think you went to war? None of them knew why. None of them knew why. And just think about that. They were wounded for life. They will suffer for life. Their families will suffer for life. The 4,500 men and women I mentioned who died, their families will suffer for life. And they didn't know why they were called to go to war. That is sad, disappointing. And so I thought, on behalf of the men and women of our armed forces, I had to write this book as my part in some closure for them, even closure for me, knowing the truth. I had to take the chance to write this book. As you know, there were people that were not happy with me, but I was going to do it anyhow. I accepted the redactions in the book because, as I stated, it didn't take away my story of what I wanted to get to our troops, because many of them didn't understand why we go to war. Many of them didn't understand the politics of war. And like me, they didn't understand the politics of Israel and Palestine. And it took me, when I got into what we call OSD policy, Office of Secretary of Defense policy, I looked at that history and the lies that have been told to all of us. Some of the things that we didn't know that our own government was hiding from us in that relationship between the Palestinians and Israelis, and how things were covered up. You know, we hear October the 7th. This started way before October the 7th. The people of Palestine have been killed for decades, going all the way back to 1947. We're just now seeing it because, as I tell anyone, thank goodness for social media that people are beginning to see this now. The other reason I wrote the book, too, is I tell folks, I think I'm failing at that now. And that was, I did not want to see our men and women to go to war again based on a lie. History right now before our eyes is repeating itself. And I tell folks, I wrote the book, as you see it, it's a quick read. It was straight to the point because I wanted to warn us that it wasn't over yet. People have heard the term neocon. People have heard the term now Zionism. It's a long-term strategy of what we call a so-called greater Israel. And the plan is not done yet until Iran is taken over. And that was my goal, too, to keep us out of a war with Iran, to let as many people as possible know that Iran was the next of that mission. Why? Many people have asked, why Iraq? Why Iran? Why Syria? If you notice, they're always the people that we talk about. They're our enemies. No, they're not our enemies. Israel is making them our enemies. And that's a fact. Saddam was holding up against Israel and the United States of America. They couldn't bully him. Assad, they couldn't bully him. And which matter, whatever Ayatollah, they couldn't bully them in the government. So one by one, the Iraq war was based on, we're going to take out those leaders. We're going to take out Assad in Syria. We're going to take out Saddam. And we're going to take out the Ayatollah, which will create a greater Israel. There will be no fighting arm as Hezbollah, Hamas. I tell folks, I want you to think about this for a moment. I like to make things hit home. Imagine you've been living in your home for over 20 or 30 years, and you're going to leave it for your families, your kids, your grandkids, and all of a sudden somebody knock on your door and say, this is our home now. How would you like that? You know, I would share with others during an audience. I said, what would you do? And people talk about how they will fight back. But guess what? That's what Hamas and Hezbollah are doing. I can care less. I'm not a sympathizer for Hamas or Hezbollah as the main press and those Israeli lovers that try to portray us. I'm telling facts. They're fighting back for their livelihood. That's why they exist. That's why Hezbollah and Hamas exist. Like they tried to say Nelson Mandela, guess what? They labeled him a terrorist. And he was fighting for his country in South Africa. Malcolm X here, when Afro-Americans, blacks were fighting for their rights. Oh, he's a terrorist. They even tried to say Martin Luther King, a godly religious man, was a terrorist. was a communist. That's called propaganda. That's called disinformation. And I write about that in my book too. To make those you're trying to disenfranchise, kill, or displace, you make them the enemy. And really, they're the ones that are getting all the harm. And I had to write the book originally for the men and women of our armed forces, but then when I really saw what was happening, I wrote it for all of us in this room and the audience out there in the internet world, because I want to do my part in helping educate the American people and the world to do your own critical thinking of how wrong this is. The book has helped me to be here today. If it wasn't for the book, I would not be here today to be able to share my experience, and we can talk about that during the question and answer session. But this is my part in trying to make the world a better place. But more importantly, the critical mission now is to have the Palestinian people be able to live out their lives and are safe in their homes, to not to be displaced. You know, as I think about it, I look at us, the United States of America, and how this book ties into what's going on today. It was labeled as we're trying to prevent Saddam for using weapons of mass destruction. It could be a threat to us. That was the alleged reason we went to war. Now I ask you to do critical thinking. Let me just mention this also. Bibi Netanyahu, what he's doing now, he's always wanted to do. But the Iraq war and taking out Saddam Assad and the Ayatollah in Iran, as I mentioned before, the Bush administration said, no, we can't do that. You know, Bibi was the finance minister at that time, but he had a lot of pull in the government in Israel. And he was behind the Iraq war. He was over here. If you look back in history, you can Google it. He was always over here saying why we had to go to war in Iraq based on them having WMD. So the Bush administration said, we can't do that, but we have a plan. We're going to take out those leaders, Saddam, Assad, and the Ayatollah. And then those are the folks that are arming Hezbollah and Hamas. And we can do that without all the carnage that's taking place in Gaza right now. That didn't work out, as we know, because we got tied down in what we call an Iraqi insurgency, where we lost more lives at 4,500 that we never expected. You heard some back in history. Those of you that follow this, it will be a cakewalk. You remember some of the Bush administration officials mentioned it'll be a cakewalk in Iraq. Well, it wasn't. It was an insurgency. We got bogged down. So the next step, as you'll see in the book, we were going to Syria next to take out Assad. Guess what? He has chemical weapons. So we're going to take him out now. Now, why did he use WMD chemical weapons? And you'll see in the book, it was to scare us after 9/11. They were trying to find reasons way before 9/11, when they came in January of 2001. How can we go to war for Iraq to do this mission for Israel? How can we do it? What will make the American people follow us into war? Now, I want to tell you something. I tell folks when I'm doing these type of engagements, I can give you facts that I know, facts, and I can give you opinions, that I can give you an assumption. I'm going to give you a fact here. I'm beat up quite a bit by some who said 9/11 was an inside job. Why don't you say that? I don't know if it was an inside job. But what I can tell you that I know as a fact, there were those in the Pentagon when 9/11 happened were happy that it happened. And why were they happy? That gave them the justification to scare the hell out of you and me to go to war to prevent a so-called another 9/11 happening. And that's how the so-called war on terror was created, to scare you and me so that we would justify going to war in Iraq. And if it wasn't for the insurgency, we would have headed to Syria next, and then lastly, Iran. Now, as I tell folks, I try to do my part of sharing what I know as facts. Here's what I've asked of you. As you leave here in the audience, out in the internet world, I want you to do your own thinking, your own critical thinking. I have this old saying, I had it in my book, but for some reason I let the editor take it out. I said, fool us once, shame on you, United States government, Bush administration, but fool us again, shame on us. And guess what? Shame on us if we believe that Iran is 2 days away from a nuclear weapon, so we must go in and attack them. How long, for those of you that follow this, have been hearing this from Bibi Netanyahu, that Iran is 2 to 3 days away from a nuclear weapon? That's been going on for decades. But that's to get us to scare you and me to support a war with Iran. And once you finish off with Iran, guess what? It's a long-term strategy. They go through both administrations. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Syria was taken down during a Democratic administration. They finally got Assad. They finally got it. And what is Israel doing right now? Bombing Syria. Bombing Syria right now. Next in line, Iran. Once you take out Iran, then Bibi Netanyahu can do anything he wants to do. He can tell Trump, guess what, Trump? I'm going to give you Trump Palace in Gaza. And Trump's, I'm so happy. But we as Americans, we can't allow that to happen. We must talk among ourselves. You know, we must be able to call our members of Congress to share with them. We should not be spending our money, losing our lives on behalf of an apartheid, genocidal country. And here's another question I would like to leave you with. Any country, any government, our Congress, our administrations that would allow, provide cover, provide weapons, provide money to kill innocent women and children, do you think we are immune? Make it personal. I want you to feel it. If our government will allow the killing of innocent women and children, you don't think they would do the same against you for power? So I wrote that book originally for the men and women of the armed forces who had to make the first sacrifice, some with their lives. I wanted their families to know the truth. It wasn't about no WMD. It wasn't about no contract. It wasn't about revenge for baby daddy. It wasn't about no revenge and trying to get oil, even though that was a subset. You know, if you take over Iraq, as Trump will say, hey, we should have kept the oil. He says the quiet part out loud. That's why some of the oligarchs don't like him. He tells the truth out loud. You know, taking minerals and so forth from Ukraine. We can talk about that later on in the question and answer session. But I ask of you, those out there in the internet world, to purchase the book Deadly Betrayal, because I want you to know how we got to where we are now. You'll learn about the neocons and the backstory. I work with those neocons up close. I work with the Zionists up close. The Zionists during my time was, listen to what I'm about to say, they were running the Pentagon. I was in shock. You know, it was so bad, and I really mean this. The Zionists were running the Pentagon. I had somebody to caution me to say, hey, you can't say Merry Christmas in here. I was in shock. What are you talking about? And that's when I started doing my investigating and found out who am I working with? They were running the Pentagon, using our troops, using our money to attack another country. And now we are paying, you and me are paying, we're complicit because we are part of the United States of America, of the killing of innocent women and children. And so Deadly Betrayal, it was a betrayal. 4,500 military men and women died on a lie on behalf of Israel, a deadly betrayal. And now if we don't do our part, we're walking into another deadly betrayal based on an alleged, I was going forward and say it's a lie, of a country that they're saying is trying to create a nuclear weapon. Use your critical thinking. If they were 2 days away from a nuclear weapon decades ago, I would think they would have that nuclear weapon by now. And think again, we went to war in Iraq because of WMD. No WMD. Fool us once, shame on them. Fool us twice, shame on us. Amar, I think it's time for us to take a break from here, and then we'll go in with Larry and I.
Thank you very much, Chief Fritz. I want to hold up a copy of your book so people can see and people at home can see. People here in person, we actually have copies of the book for sale, which will be for sale at about 7:30. Matt Ho, who was a former Marine Corps officer and Iraq War veteran, who's also spoken here before, he said about this book that it's an actual act of service. It will help many people, including veterans, connect the dots to explain this century's American wars. Someone else who you guys might be familiar with, Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. Ben from Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream said, "This is a gutsy tell-all story about bold-faced lies." So again, for the camera, here's the book, Deadly Betrayal, The Truth About Why the United States Invaded Iraq. And again, we have copies for sale for anyone interested.
And I think you'll get a lot of, I really mean that, you'll get the basic of why we went to war and how it led to what we're going through right now. Okay? I'll leave that up to Amar.
We'll sort all that out shortly. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
We have it in ebook. You can go online. I will leave this with Omar. I'll give this to you, and you just share this with folks too. There's a barcode to the publisher right there.
Okay.
Get it through.
Okay. So we'll sort out all those logistics shortly. I'm going to make a few announcements, and then we're going to bring in Colonel Wilkerson for discussion. First, the most important part of tonight's evening, passing around the collection basket. It's thanks to all of your support that this event is possible and events like these are possible. So if you can contribute to the community church, that will help us keep putting these events forward. And Dean is going to walk up and down the aisle with the basket. So yes, please contribute if you can. And also with the collection basket, our email list. If you want to stay in touch with us and see our upcoming events, you can sign up on our email list here. I also want to say thank you to Massachusetts Peace Action for co-sponsoring tonight's event and helping to promote it. Thank you to Brian and Cole and the entire team at Massachusetts Peace Action. Thank you also to Dean Stevens and Charlie Welch, Sandra Harris, Alan Perez, and the entire team at Community Church of Boston, again, for putting this event forward. And the last announcement I'll make is a couple upcoming events. First, tomorrow night, Saturday night, we have what's called a Peña. It's like a Latin American style open mic night where they read poetry, do music, and share stories and talk about whatever they want, open mic. That's happening here tomorrow, Saturday night. It's open to the public if anybody wants to join. The following day, Sunday morning, is our weekly Sunday meetings here at Community Church. And this Sunday, our speaker will be Philip Turney, who was a sailor on the USS Liberty, a United States ship that was bombed by Israel. And many United States servicemen were killed in that attack, and many survived. And Philip Turney, one of the survivors, will be speaking with us on Sunday by Zoom. That's on Sunday. The last event I'll announce right now is a week from today, 6 p.m. Friday, April 18th, on Zoom and on YouTube. We'll have retired Ambassador Chaz Freeman. He will be speaking with us. He'll deliver a talk to us titled, "How Competitive is the United States with China?" And he has a presentation with maps and charts. It's going to be very informative and important. So if the idea of listening to Ambassador Chaz Freeman speak about China appeals to you, then you're not going to want to miss this. those are my announcements. And now we'll bring in Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson to have a conversation with Dennis Fritz.
Okay, if I can make this introduction and we'll get us going with Larry and I. As you can imagine, me knowing what I knew, working in the Pentagon, I started writing my book, as I stated then. I thought I was watching Doug Feith write his book, based on cherry picking the intel. As I mentioned earlier, I got offered the opportunity to go over to Walter Reed to take care of our war wounded, specifically on the Air Force side of the house, to make sure their families were taken care of and any non-medical needs were met. As I tell the story, I could have been fired from that job many times because knowing what I knew, the politicians of the world, they want to come in and be seen. They were coming, voted for the war, mind you, and wanted to come in and see the wounded warriors and say, oh, thank you for your service. We love you. And that used to bother me. And I used to remind those senators and congressmen, you voted for this war that was based on a lie. And you're the reason that they are here. Don't thank them for their service. You thank me for my service. You thank them for their sacrifice because their families and them are going to be ruined for life. Amazing, I never got fired. I even made some members cry because I was giving them facts. And I said, the next time, this is my part again, we think about going to war, you better think about the folks I just introduced you to. Now, Larry wasn't immune from that. Larry was the first Bush administration official that I saw that came out and said, wait a minute. We led America down a dark road. And I saw an interview by him. And I said, I got to reach out to this guy. I think it was back in 2008, maybe. It's been a while now. We've been friends ever since. I said, I got to reach out to this guy. Though he's coming out and said we led America down a dark road, I want him to see what that dark road did to our men and women of our United States of America and to the country. And so I reached out to him by way of an email, thinking I'll never hear back from this guy. I think he was teaching at George Washington University at the time. And I found him and I sent him an email and told him who I was. And I said, hey, you work for a chairman. We have something in common. I work for a previous chairman, General Myers, and we have a lot in common. You can Google me, whatever, to say I'm not just some crazy guy, off the street. And I told him I work at Walter Reed. And I said, I want you to come here and visit some of the troops to see what that war did to them. And guess what? A few days, I heard back from him. I was in shock. He said, yes, I'll come. And as I stated, he was not immune. He'll tell you about it. I introduced him to the most wounded individuals you can imagine. And it touched Larry. And I said, Larry, you have a platform. That's when he was all over the news, MSNBC, CNN. He was everywhere. I said, you have a platform, and I want you to use it to see what we, the United States of America, did to these young men and women and their families. And he said he would do it. But not only did he did it, he surpassed anything I would have imagined of him. And he remembered, I said, Larry, you have a platform, but I don't. And he'll tell you about it. I told him I was writing a book, but I was scared to write it. He kept pushing me. You got to do that book. I remember bringing him a binder, huge binder. We met for lunch. And I had pictures and everything. And I said, Larry, here's my book. And he was surprised. He said, you got to get that book out. Not only that, he said, Dennis, I'm going to get you a platform. And as you've heard, I'm the director of the Eisenhower Media Network. If it wasn't for Larry introducing me to the Eisenhower Media Network, I wouldn't be here today either. And so I'm indebted to Larry for his courage. He had to break away from Colin Powell. So I'm indebted to him. And when he came over to Walter Reed, I'll let him tell you about his experience. It touched him. And we've been friends ever since, fighting this battle together. And so, Larry, my man, I want to thank you for being my friend and fighting this battle together along with others. And I'll let Larry, please. Then he'll tell you his side of how we came together, and then we'll sit here and talk, and like we do on the phone, we'll call each other and say we're only going to talk for 5 minutes. An hour later, we're still on the phone. One of us, oh, I got to go. I got an interview. It happens every time. Hey, it's going to be a quick phone call, and so we may have some of those phone calls right here before you. Share some information, some of the things that we talk about and what we learn. Larry.
Well, it was a little more self-interested than Dennis suggests. I had just been down on the Rose River in Virginia, trout fishing, and I had fly fishing, and I had stepped in a hole and cut about a centimeter and a half gap in my Achilles tendon. And so I was limping along the river back to my car, limped back to Washington. And I said, man, I got to have surgery on this. And I did. I had the Washington Redskins professional 10 years in service surgeon. I picked the best to do my foot because I knew it was in bad shape. He did the surgery, everything was fine, and afterwards he could not get the wound to heal. It just would not heal. And this was a very famous surgeon. He could not get it to heal. He called me in about 30 days after the surgery when it was apparent it wasn't going to heal, and he said, Larry, I got some bad news for you. You're going to have to see a wound expert. I said, Doc, a wound expert? He said, yeah, I cannot get your ankle to heal. I said, damn, I know. Pardon me. I said, darn, I know the best wound experts in the world. And they're not in any phone book you have, Doc. They're at Washington Reed National Military Medical Center, where they've tended thousands of wounds over the last few years. I didn't know how to get in there. This guy, he got me in there. And not only did I meet him and get introduced, as he said, to a lot of these veterans of all the services, I got introduced to a nurse practitioner by the name of Kara Couch, who was unbelievable. The doctors and surgeons, plastic surgeons, other types of surgeons, all listened to her. They took her advice. I watched her. Every day that I went in for her medicinal, other types of alternative medicine treatments on my ankle, which eventually fixed it. And I listened to her talk to these doctors, and they listened to her. And often they took her advice on what to do in a particular plastic surgery operation or whatever it might be. And I also met people like this Special Forces captain who had a 5-year-old son who used to come with him to his consultations with Kara and her staff. And he was burned over about 75–80% of his body. And most of those burns were second and third degree burns. And it was obvious to me that, he was not going to have a very meaningful life in terms of physical exercise and his occupation and other things. And his son was watching all this happen all this time. And she would pack him with honey and other things that were alternative medicine type techniques. And she was doing some good, but as she explained to me, there wasn't a whole lot she could do except ease his pain and make his life a little bit softer than it otherwise would be. I ran into a lot of people, a second lieutenant female standing in profile to me, left profile, and I'm looking at her, very lovely young lady, probably about 22, 23 or so. And when she saw me come into the treatment room, she turned towards me and she had no right arm from the elbow gone. And she was getting ready to enter physical therapy under Kara's tutelage and some other people on her staff. So I got to see all of this, but the most dramatic one was Dennis introduced me to the Air Force's, at that time, only triple amputee. He was in Afghanistan. I think it was his second tour, Iraq one time and then Afghanistan. He was almost at the end of his tour in Afghanistan. He was defusing an IED, improvised explosive device, one day, just short of his departure. His tour was up. He was in his full gear, and he was down looking at the IED, and he had a comm problem, so he was hitting his helmet. He couldn't hear his partner, who was 100 meters or so down the line per protocol. So he stood up and hit his helmet, and the only reason he survived was he stood up. The IED was command detonated, went off, in other words, took both his legs off and his right arm. So he's a gentleman sitting at the table with me and Dennis one day, and a Marine was sitting there with his right leg below the knee missing, and the Marine was saying things to me like, "Man, I'm in good shape compared to him." And they were laughing back and forth, but there was no laughter really in the triple amputee's face. And he told me a story I'll never forget, and Dennis just rehearsed a little bit of it. But this was very powerful for me. He said he had just had a good morning. I said, "Oh?" He said, "Yep. Not only did I find out that they've outfitted a van for me, was donated, $250,000, I think he said. Somebody donated it to him, and he could drive it because it was all equipped so he could drive it." But he said the really good thing that happened to me was I was in my room, and a congressional delegation walked in. And they started, as usual, thanking me for my service right off the bat. And I stopped them. I just stopped them. I said, "No, no, 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 no. Don't thank me for my service. I'm conflicted over that. Thank me for my sacrifice. You can clearly see that." And he said they turned around and left. And he said that was his best thing that happened to him in a long time. But that's how he felt. That's really how he felt. And the whole time he was telling the story, the Marine was going, "Yeah, I feel the same way. Don't thank me for my service again, because I'll poke you in the eye if you do." Because these are not stupid young men and women. They knew they'd been used, and they knew they had paid dearly for that maluse. So that's how I came to really appreciate what Dennis was doing.
Yeah. I can tell you, the individual we're talking about, imagine me not writing this book when I think about him. As I said, my job was to take care of the non-medical needs, take care of their families. When he was wounded, we had to reach out to his wife, who was 7 months pregnant at the time. And we had to fly her into Washington, D.C. And of course, going through all that trauma, she had
19 surgeries, I think.
Wait, that's Des. Yeah. He had 19 surgeries. But at the same time, the trauma of him going through that, she had an early delivery, premature delivery. And so on the same day, you had him going, I didn't mention his name, but, with Des for short, and going through a surgery while she was up on the next floor delivering. And then one thing that struck with me, man, I'm going to be that brave guy now here, but if it doesn't touch your heart, you're not human. For him to reach out to me after the baby was born, and for him to tell me, "Hey, Chief, what hurts me most is that I will not be able to hold my baby, in both of my arms." That destroyed me, and I had to write this book. I wanted him to know, and others, we can't allow this to happen again on lives. It's a different story if we're really defending our country, but we going to these wars on lies. The good news about that, not only were we able to equip him with a van, he could actually drive this thing. It was good. But we were able to get him prosthetic arms where he could hold his baby. That's a good news story. Think about this, a young man who was badly burned. The entire face was burned. And his mom would come out of the room, his room every day and cry every morning. And finally, the young man's dad said, "Hey, Chief, I know you probably wonder why she cries every day." I said, "Sir, I know. That's her son." This young man was 19, but he was so badly burned, he was traumatized. The face was traumatized. You would have thought he was 80. And the father told me that his mom, God, she had such a firm belief in God that she felt the next morning she walked in that room, he was going to be healed. And when it wasn't happening, she would cry every day, leave out the room. The father showed me a picture of him. Man, was he handsome. Handsome. And that's what his mom had to see every day, her child. This happened because it was a lie. He lost both eyes, face messed up for the rest of his life. We can't let that happen again. We got to be loud. I want to challenge the churches. I'm going to another church in May. I want to challenge you. You all need to be loud with this. We can't allow the killing of innocent women and children, and we can't allow wars based on lies.
And think about 150 to 200,000, because that's the true number, half of whom are children and women in Gaza and on the West Bank who've gone through the same pain and misery.
Well, let me comment on that. Larry and I, we went on the Hill. If you heard of Doctors Against Genocide, we went on Capitol Hill with them to have an audience with members of Congress. We only got a few, maybe two, to see them. But worse than that, they were treated like criminals.
Yeah.
Larry and I sent in a protest letter. Now, how do I raise that? As Larry mentioned to you, we were able to get him some of the care. Larry's not telling the story. It was a possibility Larry may not have walked again, from that injury not healing. But we were able to get him some of the best care. So think about what we have at Walter Reed. Walter Reed had some of the best care for amputees and burns, also down in Texas. What's happening in Gaza right now, what happened to Dez, the young man I said face was fully burned, is happening to those kids right now in Gaza. And guess what? They don't have the care that Larry had and that the Dez's had and that Mike had.
They don't even have food to eat.
And they don't have anesthesia. We talk to the doctors. They don't, and guess what? Our government is complicit in that. And you think I'm going to shut up?
And if you're a doctor and you are saving lives, no matter what they are, children, women, whatever, they're going to arrest you.
Or shoot you.
Because they don't want you saving those lives.
Or shoot you. Some of the doctors say they have to fear for their lives every day. That's our government. And they don't want us to speak about that. Fool us once, shame on them. Fool us again, shame on us. Okay, I see Omar is back there twitching and everything. He wants to get in this question and answer section. And give y'all an opportunity to ask anything that you so desire. I'm only in this one area, that drives me, the Middle East and so forth, but we have the Godfather here that is the man of all things, knows all.
Right.
Thank you. So yes, we're going to get into question and answer session now. So if people in the audience want to raise their hands for questions, the only request is to respect all of each other's time and the time of our special guest speakers. We have to please keep our questions brief, so we can get to as many questions as possible and give them time to answer. So first question.
Hi, I'm Tim Cargan. I'm affiliated with the local Catholic Worker House and Veterans for Peace and Warrior Writers. I read years ago in the New York Review of Books that was citing retired Israeli intelligence and military people that Israel needs the U.S. military if they want to shut down the centrifuges in Iran, that it would need to be troops on the ground, and Israel's not capable of doing it on their own. And they also said that you need to have a presence maintained in Iran to stop them from just rebuilding the stuff that you shut down. But that aside, is that your understanding that Israel's not capable of doing it without us, and that's probably the root of Netanyahu's obsession with luring us into it?
You want a simple answer? Yes.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
Yes. They can't do it by themselves. I'm not even sure we can do it. In fact, I'm quite confident that we would make Iraq look like child's play if we try to do it wrong. Think about it for a moment. 90 million people, not 26 million like Iraq. They're very homogeneous. 51% of them are Persian. And even the Azeris and the Baluchs and others who from time to time on the border areas give them a problem, if we were to attack, would solidify and come together with them. So you'd have 90 million people. I have war planned for meeting the Russians in Iran. You may remember the Russians came down in Afghanistan when they had their little foray into Afghanistan. And I was a war planner at the time, and we thought the Russians were going to keep going. We didn't think they could possibly be interested in Afghanistan. We thought they were making a move, which was very Russian. Go back and check their imperial history on the Persian Gulf. going south for a warm water port at Chabahar or Bandar Abbas or whatever, and controlling the Persian Gulf. We thought that's what they were interested in. So we were war planning. We came to the conclusion if we tried to cross compartment with armored columns and such in Iran, in the Zagros Mountains and other places like that, that incidentally almost killed Alexander the Great, we'd get destroyed. We didn't have a military that was big enough. But if we were going to do it, we recommended 2.5 million people originally, and we said it would take 10 years to subdue the country. And we said at that time it would cost probably $500 billion. Well, just fast forward to today, and you got the same things and lots more money and lots more pain and agony. And after 10 years, you would have nothing better than Iraq or Afghanistan, because they'd still be fighting you from the mountains like Ansar, the Houthis, are doing today in Yemen, only 10 times more of them and much better equipped. So it'd be a disaster.
And that's why I'm going to use Houthis as an example. Look how long we don't spend $1 billion right now bombing the Houthis. And oh, by the way,
I think it's more than that.
Oh, it's more than that. That was, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what they're listing, $1 billion. But I want you to think about this too. When we talk about Iraq, when I said 4,500 were killed, it'll take an invasion, as you said. You just can't bomb yourself, away from this. It'll take, they're in the mountains, embedded. In fact, they've showcased that, open source. They've showcased that. But think about this for a moment. You think about the Houthis, you think about Iraq. Iran has something that neither one of them had, and that's ballistic missiles, accurate ballistic missiles. And that was one of the things that Trump decided he was going to break away from the Iran nuclear deal because they wanted to include the ballistic missiles. But Iran would be foolish to do that. And we've already seen that they're accurate and they're very powerful. They're not rockets, they're ballistic missiles.
And following up on that, can both of you share with our audience, talk about the talks that are happening in Oman tomorrow, and what is the purpose of those talks, and what do you guys think about them?
I think there's a real possibility that Donald Trump, and his mercurial nature makes me wonder if he has the steadfastness to stay with this. Look what he did with Kim Jong-un in Korea in his first tour. And then look what he's done with Ukraine now. He's pretty much put Ukraine aside because it became intractable for them. So that's my basic concern about starting these direct talks in Oman. And they probably will be direct talks. Their bill right now is indirect, with Iranian foreign minister sitting there and Steve Witkoff sitting there and talking through intermediaries. But I'll guarantee you almost that they're going to wind up at the end of the day talking to one another. They'll still need translators probably, but they're going to wind up talking together. So you're going to have direct talks for the first time since the revolution. And that's good. That's very good. And the parameters for a deal are apparent, but they can't possibly be the deal that Trump published in that decision memorandum, saying essentially 8 points, but essentially the 8 points added up to Iran must totally disarm. In one of the most dangerous regions of the world, Iran must totally disarm. That's not going to happen. So I'm worried that it's going to be a verification set of talks. They're going to boil it down to, okay, JCPOA parameters, the previous nuclear deal, where Iran does certain things and we verify them on a periodic basis, only this verification regime will be a lot tougher. If it does boil down to that, and it just bleeds out over time into technical talks, which it will have to, because Donald Trump can't talk about nuclear reactors, nor can Steve Witkoff, nor can the Iranian foreign minister. Teams have to be brought in, as they were for the JCPOA. Then we could have a deal. We could have a long time to get to the verification regime, maybe 6 months to a year, but we could have a deal, which would be good because there wouldn't be no war. And that's what we want, is no war. But my problem is Kim Jong-un, it's Ukraine, it's Trump doesn't seem to have the discipline and the staying power, even though maybe Witkoff does, that he needs to do a deal like this. And that's what concerns me. It's much easier to turn to the bombs and the bullets.
What I would say that as well, even though the talks are supposed to happen, I don't think Israel wants peace until Iran is probably destroyed, like Syria and Iraq was. And the reason I say that is because of the fact Iran does not need a nuclear weapon. Their conventional weapons can do harm. And that is what Israel fears. They want total control of not only greater Israel, but a large majority of the Middle East.
Yeah, you've all been lied to with regard to the exchanges back in October and in April between Israel and Iran. Israel did not really do much damage to Iran at all. That's why they did not come back with an immediate response. They ran into a buzzsaw of Russian air defense facilities. You should hear some of the chatter between their F-35 pilots, for example. They would not penetrate what I would call the danger area, where the F-35 and, for that matter, the other aircraft too, should have been relatively invulnerable because they couldn't understand what was happening. And what was happening, S-400s were painting them. Russian best air defense systems in the world were painting them. And so they launched their weapons from outside the optimum zone to launch them. And as a result, they didn't hit very much. So the Iranians didn't strike back. You know, they said they would, but they didn't because they weren't hurt very badly. If we go now and we go full force with what we could put on them, it'll be a different situation. We will not, in my view, get their nuclear system. We won't. It's too far underground. It's too sophisticated. But we will do a lot of damage and we'll make them mad as hell. And they have the ability to strike Saudi Arabian oil facilities, strike our base at Al Udeid, strike into Saudi Arabia and other places like Military City, where we have other airfields, strike our naval facilities on Bahrain. They can make a real mess if they want to. And then we would have no choice but probably to invade. So it's really not a very good scenario if you go beyond these talks in a military way.
And just as an example, I know you want to get another question. I think you had one. Yeah. But we have examples. You know, all you have to do is look at, and when Iran say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. Soleimani, that was the head of the Israeli, I see his head shakes there. When we assassinated him, we assassinated him.
Under Trump.
They said that we were going to come after, they said they were going to come after us. And they hit a base in Iraq with American troops. If it wasn't for the Iraqis warning us, we would have lost a lot of lives. And those were ballistic missiles. And they warned Iraq, and then Iraq warned us. Another example, when they say they were hit back in Israel, they did, and they did more damage than what the press released. And it's understandable. Israel's not going to say that because you don't want them to know the battle damage assessment. You don't want them to know what harm they did. But I can tell you, Iran did a lot of damage, close to the Mossad headquarters at that, too.
This morning, the Rehabilitation Division of the Israeli Defense Force released the first figures on Israeli casualties since October the 7th in Gaza alone, not including Lebanon and not including on the West Bank. They were 16,500 wounded. That's the real indication of modern warfare, is the wounded, not the killed, because medical evacuation is so good today, and the Israelis are operating on interior lines. They don't even have to move their people more than about 19 clicks in the max. Usually they don't have to move them more than about 1,000 meters, and they're at a battlefield surgical hospital. So that's a huge indicator that they are not, Bibi Netanyahu's objective, strategically being destroyed. They simply are not being destroyed, the Hamas, I mean. The other figure they released was that 7,500 of the Israeli Defense Force ground troops are suffering from dramatic post-traumatic stress. Well, that tells you two things, one of which is not good, but it's positive at least, and the other is very negative. One, it tells you again how big the IDF's casualties are. And two, what happens when you pull the PTSD soldiers off the battlefield is you're left with the cretins. Because the reason you get post-traumatic stress is you have a conscience. So these people are the people who at least followed the laws of war and didn't kill women and children and babies and so forth. Now what you have on the battlefield are Ben Gavirs and Smotriches and their equivalents, really bad people. So At the same time, Hamas has reconstituted itself. Its figures now are 40,000 fighters. This morning, one of the CNN guys was poo-pooing that and saying, well, they're young kids and all this stuff. Each one of them has a Kalashnikov and at least 20 rounds of ammunition has been taught how to shoot it. So you got 40,000 people out there that are going to shoot at you, and you are down to now having 2,000 Air Force join in signing a letter. You got 300, Unit 8200, their most exclusive, secretive intelligence entity that have signed a letter. And Bibi Netanyahu is calling them all traitors. And they're essentially signing these letters saying you aren't concerned with the hostages. And until you're concerned with the hostages, we're not going to fight for you anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's a real problem in Israel right now. It's self-created. They've made their own hell.
Omar, if you let me make one more comment. When I was talking about using your own critical thinking to think about this for a moment, I stated earlier that I've been pushed to say, oh, 9/11 was an inside job. I don't know that. And I'm not going to say that. I don't know. But there were some in the Pentagon that were happy. Likewise, as I stated earlier, this is something, what's happening right now in Gaza, shamefully, this is something that Bibi Netanyahu has always wanted to do. Now, you've heard it yourself. There are some that says Israel let October 7th happen. Now, I don't know that, but just think about this for a moment. Go back and look. October the 7th, America, is our 9/11. October the 7th is our Pearl Harbor. Guess what? This is my excuse now to do what I've always wanted to do.
And Bibi uses that all the time with American audiences.
There you go.
That. He talks about 9/11. He says, you did it.
You did it.
So why can't I do it? Well, we did it, but we didn't kill women and children and babies and everything intentionally.
There you go. Yeah. I think
Our next question goes to our new friend, Kyle.
Hi. Thank you. Colonel, I listen to you every week on Judge Napolitano's program, and I really look forward to it. And I really appreciated when you said, what's his name? Antony Blinken. He was the worst Secretary of State since.
Don't get him started.
I call him winking, blinking, nod, and nudge.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Blinken,
Yeah.
Biden, Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and you can't leave out Lloyd Austin, but you really can't leave out nudge Victoria Nuland.
Yeah. Ugh.
She of the FU, you Europeans.
Yeah. You said he was the worst Secretary of State since Thomas Jefferson. So yeah,
that covered the whole.
Yeah, it was hilarious. But anyway, it just seems really hopeless to talk to to call to our Congress people, since so many of them are bought by AIPAC. And I mean, I do call mine here, and thankfully, Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, they did vote with Bernie on trying to stop sending more money to Israel. Cory Booker, of course, did not, even though he'll stand up there for 25 hours and basically just for his own purposes. But it's just so shameful. And and Bernie said the other day, oh, we've got to get big money. You keep saying that, but we've got to get money out of elections. But it feels very hopeless. But anyway, my real question is.
Can I address that point?
Sure, yes, please.
Let me just, that one. I don't know if you've heard of this or not. It's called America's Promise. And we're going for a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. And we now have 28 states, and we're working on our 29th and 30th. We have states like Texas. We're in Wyoming right now with a positive outlook. And all we need is 39 states. And then it's a constitutional convention. And what we're doing in each state is they are passing a piece of legislation per their process in their state. And that legislation says, yes, when the time comes, we'll vote for that. And so Congress is going to have no choice but to put forward, like when the women won their votes, and we're following their game plan. We got their game plan out and we looked at it and we said, these women were smart. The only thing they did that was bad was when they broke up because the prohibitionists didn't agree with the people who just wanted to go after the vote. And so Susan B. Anthony and a bunch, they broke apart at that point. We don't plan on doing that, but we're going to do this. We've been at it 8 years. We're going to do it in 12, and you need to get this place on your agenda and join the group. I don't know where Massachusetts is. I got the list at home, but I don't know where it is. But we need we need 38 states. You probably have. You probably have. Oh, you haven't.
The local group here that's working on this is it's closely allied with the national movement called Move to Amend. I presume you have heard of that. Yes.
Yeah.
They're not working on a convention necessarily. They hope to get it through Congress. They have a bill currently there with, I think, 40 co-sponsors roughly right now, which is a very good constitutional amendment that would not only say that money is not speech protected by the First Amendment, but also say corporations are not people for the purposes of constitutional rights. There's a group here which called We the People Massachusetts, which is working on getting Beacon Hill to sign on. Since the pandemic, they've been less active, but I believe that they still are working on it.
Okay.
So,
our group is called America's Promise. Just Google it. You'll find it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I know there are a lot of other groups in each of the states, but ours is America's Promise. And I think we have the best possibility of going national with it. It's a difficult process, as the women proved, but they stuck with it and got the vote.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let me just make a comment, too, in regards to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which, like I said, this is probably the most optimistic I've been in the last, few months. Like I said, a decade ago, the only person I could talk to about this was Larry. But the public has been more educated, and that's why we're here now. What do you all do? I mean, I have family and friends. You don't know what you don't know. Until I got into the Pentagon, I didn't know the Palestinian issue. I was listening to what the media was saying and what others were saying when Bibi come over here and what our Congress were saying because they're bought and paid for it. Don't mention Booker to me again. I mean, God, bought and paid for. Okay. Now, I say that to say this. Your Facebooks, everything, you got to go out there and educate your family and friends. You're going to get some pushback. But as I was telling Larry, we've been looking at the Gallup poll said, I don't know if you saw the Gallup poll. Yeah. And so this is the most progress we've made. And I thank social media and I thank you all, the groups, because we're finally seeing this. But I used to get upset. But people don't know what they don't know. And we have to educate them. And I hate to go back to my book again, but that's why I did that, to hope that it spreads. And I hope you share with your family and friends to get out there and get that book. Not for me, but I just want them to understand, especially for veterans, how we got into this war. And then we need to keep sharing the information with them and get out there on your social media, because social media and TikTok, listen, I kid with folks. I'm an old guy, but I'm a TikTok nut, okay? Because of the fact that's what helped get the word out. I even have a TikTok account now. And I talked to Annie's from our public affairs. I'm with the Eisenhower Media Network, and Annie does our TikToks. She's trying to get me to be able to post on our site. I haven't learned that yet, but I can write something, but I can't put voices out there. But I'm going to learn that, because we're going to take advantage of social media. And I know you know this already. It was the Israeli lobby that tried to take down TikTok. It ain't nothing about no Chinese. China got everything they want on us if they wanted that.
Mainstream media has just been a joke.
Yes. It was not doggone China. It's not, no. Listen, I've been in security all my life until I retired, okay? It's not about China. It's about the Israeli lobby, because they was losing the battle because more people are being educated of what they've been doing to the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, they hardly even mentioned the paramedics that Israel murdered last week.
Yeah, that was a particularly.
Or how about the Palestinian teenagers, Palestinian American teenagers?
Exactly.
You
Americans
don't hear
go
that
there
news.
and they get killed, and we couldn't care less about them.
Think about that
it's
for a moment. That's
disgusting.
our government.
Yeah.
Americans being killed. You're going crazy, which I sympathize. I shouldn't even know hostages. We got one American hostage, and that's all you hear us talk about. But we had Palestinian Americans killed.
Mhm.
Okay, I know we got to keep it moving here.
I just had one more question.
Okay.
I just wonder, like, is Israel controlling it, or are they doing what we want them to do? I mean,
No.
I think yeah.
You
But
can't start an argument here now, because
sorry.
I'm gonna let Larry ask this. Yeah.
I have to say it does seem like we would tell them no if we didn't want them to be, doing all this shit.
Well,
Or, excuse me,
I
but
think it's both, but I think the ultimate tool is Israel, and the ultimate empire is Washington. So we want the region in chaos until Iran is gone. We want everybody we don't like gone. Watch out, Saudi Arabia, when it becomes your turn. And Israel's our tool for doing it. Now, other people think AIPAC, and you do have enormous influence bought and paid for by AIPAC. There's no question about that. And it's not just Jewish billionaires in America, it's billionaires across the board who find this very productive for the economy, for military industrial complex and other things. We have spent so much money on Israel, it makes Ukraine pale if you know the real amounts of money that we spent on Israel. And they are paying our money back to us by bribing our congressmen with our money.
Ponzi scheme coming back. Hey, let me just make up where I was headed with this real quickly. And I want to make sure I always remind people of this. We got to separate the two. What we're talking about is Zionism. There are Jewish people out on that fighting harder than you and I on behalf of the Palestinians. So we got to separate the two. Make sure we understand it's Zionism that we're against.
Some of the kids that have been arrested on Columbia's campus, for example, were Jewish kids.
Yeah, so we always got to keep that in mind, okay? I know one of the individuals I work closely with, Ben Cohen, and a lot of the Jewish, they're not billionaires, but millionaires, have said anybody that takes money from AIPAC, they're no longer going to support them with funding. That's another start there, too. And they sign a group letter. They will not support anybody to take money from AIPAC. So we just got to remember this. This is a Zionist Israeli government, our government, whatever, okay? Because there's people out there fighting harder than you and I. As I would tell anybody, I love people for people. There's bad people in every community. I love the good, loving people, the God-loving people that care, okay? And the thing that bothers me most when you talk about Cory Booker and others, man, I'm baffled. Do they want to stay in office that bad where they'll sell their souls to the devil? I mean, I'm in shock at that. And they will beat you down. Some of you probably have met. In fact, I think Amar told me she came here. One of my good associates, his hero, Medea Benjamin, the members of Congress beat her down. You will think she's the worst person in the world. And she's trying to save lives. And they just...
Tom Cotton accused her of being a member of Ann Wright, working for Medea, accused her of being a member of the Chinese Communist
And that's a
Party.
lie.
As if Medea Benjamin has ever been anywhere near Beijing to do that.
One last thing, and I get going on this stuff right here. Speaking of Larry and I, and when Bibi came in and spoke before our Congress, I don't know if y'all remember this statement.
Yeah.
He made a statement that those folks that are out there protesting his visit and speaking before our Congress were pawns or something like that.
Pawns of Iran.
Of Iran.
Yeah. And
guess what?
Those people that were listening to him were the pawns of Netanyahu.
Right. We were out there. The Ann Wrights, the Larry Wilkerson, the Dennis Fritz were out there protesting his visit. And I did an engagement in New York, and I said, what they don't understand is that our Congress is pawns of Bibi Netanyahu.
Well, this last visit was protested a lot more than the previous one. And Bibi actually asked President Trump if he would help him prosecute organizations in Israel that are protesting him.
Crazy.
Said that the Prime Minister of Canada is pro-Hamas.
Yeah.
For a two-state solution.
Right. And France too.
That's the infamous.
The only good move Macron's made in the last 6 months.
Speaking of TikTok, our community church's TikTok, it's gaining a lot of traction over the last few months, really, except when we put the word Israel in the title. Those videos, for some reason, seem to get throttled.
Yep.
So that's just our personal experience.
Well, as Judge Napolitano was talking to me off camera the other day, he said he's something of a constitutional scholar as well as a judge. And he said he's very worried about the fact that we're using anti-Semitism and put it into legal language to curb free speech. And I think he's right. That's precisely what we're doing.
Was the next question you or Susan? Or? Okay, Brian. Okay, next question is to Brian Garvey, who is executive director of our co-sponsor tonight, Massachusetts Peace Action.
Thanks, Amar, and thank you for making that point, Chief Fritz and Colonel Wilkerson, differentiating that criticism
Oh,
of
yeah.
the government of Israel is not anti-Semitism,
Right.
because it's directly related to my question. I don't think I'm too paranoid to think that just about everyone in this room is probably on some list somewhere. And that doesn't worry me too much, because I think it's important to stand up and be counted and dissent when we think our government is doing something deplorable. But I'm wondering if either or both of you gentlemen are familiar with the case of Rumeysa Ozturk. She's the Tufts graduate student who was just kidnapped off the streets of Somerville, 2 towns over,
Right.
for the crime of co-authoring an op-ed in the
Right,
school
op-ed,
paper,
right.
demanding that Tufts University make a statement and be clear about its investments and divest from any involvement with Israel. So what advice do you have for activists who might be worried that they could get black bagged by Trump's thugs in ICE? I have heard that they're even floating the idea of deporting U.S. citizens now to El Salvador, and I'm somewhat outraged that the governor of our Commonwealth here has not even released a statement or said a mumbling word, as Dr. Cornell West would say, about this kidnapping and abduction of Miss Ozturk. So what can we do as activists? How serious do you take this threat of deporting U.S. citizens? And what can we encourage our state governments to do to push back against these federal thugs from D.C.?
I think one of the most powerful things you mentioned there is the latter remark. I think the state governments have to do something. And if they're not doing anything, then they're a lot closer to the people than Washington. Then the people need to get the state governments to change their minds through either the voting patterns or through protests, telephone calls, constituent visits, whatever. A lot easier to do at the state level. And we forget sometimes that the great strength of our republic, if it's a republic anymore, is states, not the federal government in Washington. That's one reason we started this America's Promise campaign. Maine started it because for the first time in Maine's history, 7, 8 years ago, more money poured into Maine than in its political lifetime for one campaign, and 75% of that money was from out of state. And they got together, even the Republicans and Democrats got together in Maine and said, this isn't right. This shouldn't happen. We're going to start this movement. So Maine was the first state to pass a state legislation that said, we'll be with you when you get to the 38 number. States are a lot more powerful, and the Republicans keep saying that. That's a Republican mantra, that the states they should decide abortion. They should decide whether or not you get the HIV treatment. Whatever it is, they think the states are all powerful. Let's turn it on them. I'm a Republican. Let's turn it on them, and let's use the states because they're easier to get a grasp on, to grip locally, and to change minds. You change their minds by voting them out if they don't do it and voting them in if they do. And I think that's what we're missing. That's one of the ingredients we're missing, is we need to do it locally and then let it transport itself, as it will. I know it takes time, 7 to 8 years usually. It takes time to get to Washington. But I'm seeing Republicans right now come back from town hall meetings in their states, and they're mumbling under their breath right now in the Congress at Johnson. They're mumbling about Trump because he's not doing what they thought he was going to do with regard to their constituents who in town hall meetings are complaining to him. I just got laid off. I don't know why I got laid off. But people don't realize that the Defense Department has 800,000 civilians, 560 or 600,000 or something like that, who don't work in Washington. They work all across the country, and a lot of them have been let go. And so they're talking to their constituents, they're talking to their congressmen and their senators, state senators and such. It's getting back. It's getting back a lot faster than I thought it would. And it's probably because he's being so dramatic about it. And some of these things are really crazy.
Something you said earlier, and Larry said it takes time. And I can just use an example that you just used here, about the cuts and Doge and all that.
Yeah.
When you said you're calling, your senators and so forth. Well, see, we got to get others doing that too, because regardless of money, members of Congress look at numbers. I used to work in what we call congressional affairs for the Air Force. I traveled with members of Congress, and I they look at numbers. They do look at polls. I've seen members win without having a whole bunch of money if they had the right cause. Like, for example, the Doge, what Larry said, when they first came in, they were looking at Washington, D.C. And the people out was joining it. Yeah, let's get rid of all those people in Washington, D.C. in the government. They didn't realize they're in rural areas too. Social Security, and Medicare.
State Department lost a bunch of people in South Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. Even this, like State Department, you look at it, South Carolina. So you think about that. And so now you got Republican members. Whoa, hey, we're pushing back. We even got them fighting within the Trump administration, about the cuts and all that. Now, why am I saying that? That's what we have to do. Not only you calling, that's what all of us can do to continue, not only within our organization, but individually. I'm fighting with some of my family members because they've been indoctrinated, and don't understand. And so you have to explain to them, and get them to do their own critical thinking. And then when they start calling in, members of Congress look at numbers. They really do. I saw it personally when they look at numbers and polls. And so we got to get more people. And like I said, the reason I'm so optimistic, because the young people, I'm getting calls, but help me understand this, Mr. Fritz or Chief Fritz, or whatever the case. I never knew about what the Palestinian people were going through until I saw it on TikTok, And so we got to keep doing it and don't give up, because this is the most optimistic I've been. And, I agree. Some may disagree with me on this. Some people need to say, hey, you need to get rid of Israel. I believe in the two-state solution, because it's almost like, got to be candid with you. Even though I'm Afro-American, I'm an American. We're not the indigenous people here, so I'm not going anywhere. I love America, okay? And so likewise, I just can't expect people to uproot themselves and leave. But we got to either have a two-state solution, or the Palestinians and Arabs and everybody, Israelis, going to have to live together like they used to before 1948 and 1947. They lived together peacefully until I got to be candid with you, colonialism coming out of Europe said we're going, like we did here and other places, we want to take over that portion of the Middle East. Okay? So either you're going to live together, which a lot of Israeli Zionists don't want, because they will be the minorities, if you will, okay? Or you're going to have a two-state solution. And then finally, what I will say to this, I made some people feel uncomfortable, but I guess if they don't want the two-state solution or live happily together as they did before 1947, but Israel became a state in 1940, before then when they were leading to 1948, living peacefully, the only thing it's going to probably take an all-out war. And eventually, Israel will not win that.
Here's something Hegseth is going to be looking at that no one was thinking about, certainly not in the Defense Department. There are 70,000 American soldiers who are married to, and in many cases are themselves, Hispanics, Pakistanis, you name it. And their wives and children right now are being isolated by Customs and Border Patrol, as many others are across the land, and they're scared. Well, the commanders of those units at Fort Drum, for example, in New York, where there's about 10,000 of them, have started telling Hegseth, you can't be doing this. You're going to disturb a third of the United States Army's combat forces. He's going to back up, I guarantee you, on that. And more of that needs to happen, not just the military, but other people who are losing spouses, children, because maybe they're green card holders, maybe one of them is even a citizen, and Trump is treating, or the administration is treating, Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, are treating it all as if it were just one part of the problem, which is getting people out of the United States. And another thing they're doing, in the Bush administration, we created what we called a 100 nautical mile range for Customs and Border Patrol. And what that meant on the Mexican border, for example, was that he could go, that agent, he or she, could go within 100 miles, nautical miles, of his particular station and with no probable cause arrest people, confiscate their computers, whatever. Now, most of it happened at the border or within a kilometer or two of the station. But they decided they would exercise that power a little more widely under the first Trump administration, and now they're doing it even more, and use that 100 miles. Well, that applies to airports too, because that's where they have stations at airports that are international airports, which many are in the United States now. They can range within 100 nautical miles of an airport and arrest you. Doesn't matter. They don't need probable cause. They don't even need reasonable suspicion. What one border agent told me was, I look at you and I think you look unsavory. I arrest you. And you might be in that arrest for 30 to 45 days before you get yourself out of it. And it ain't a fun 30 to 45 days. And they've already got some people who've been in that situation. And it hasn't made the mainstream press yet, except in a couple of isolated cases, but it will eventually, especially if they keep doing it. And these flights that are using civilian airlines, they're not using Guantanamo, spent money down there, put troops down there to make it look like he was going to use Guantanamo. There are 30 deportees in Guantanamo. We're using civilian airlines just the way the CIA used them to render people to torture. We're using them to take 200 or so males, usually, shackle head to foot with flight attendants in the aisles to El Salvador. This is crazy. The flight attendants are now protesting. There was an article in Atlantic recently about a company that particularly protested because these flight attendants were hired to take people to island paradises. On private jets, you're going to fly Taylor Swift here or, whatever. And now they're carrying 200 or so men shackled from head to foot to El Salvador, and they aren't happy about it. So this is all going to backfire on them ultimately, but they're making a lot of money off of it right now. The airlines in particular are making money, which is why they shifted full plane every time, and the government paying the bill.
We're a little bit past our time, so we're going to take two more quick questions and then close the program. Next question is from our friend from Veterans for Peace.
Yeah, my name is Joe Cabatas, Veterans for Peace, Vietnam vet. I have a couple of questions about the beginning of the Iraq War when they had Saddam Hussein giving out, I don't know if it's fake news, $25,000 to suicide bombers to go into Israel. I don't know if that was true or not. The other one was Saddam Hussein was going to turn around and use the euro as money because oil is a dollar, the petro oil. So that was another reason. And then I personally work with the Quakers and went around Boston and collected 350 signatures in 2006, which is 3 years after the war, to get the war on the ballot, Iraq war, ended immediately in Massachusetts. And every single precinct in those 150 towns voted to end the war immediately. And we still have troops in Iraq. Why did it proceed to continue when?
Well, we always call Massachusetts the Commonwealth of Communist Massachusetts, I mean, that's the way the military looked at Massachusetts for a long time. You had Natick, but everything else was east of Natick. One state is not enough. One state is good, but one state is not enough. You need regional power. And the way you do that is connect the states as best you can. That's how we did the constitutional business we're trying to do. Every state now knows about us. Every state has one of our members in its legislature who knows its all the states' legislative processes are different. In fact, it's a cacophony of processes. One state is unicameral, another state is bicameral, another state is tricameral. One state meets every 3 years, other states meet every year, twice a time. It's a melange of things out there. So you need regional experts who understand each of the states they're going to be working in, understand their political process, and who has the real power. We went to Texas. Don't go to the governor. The governor's powerless in Texas. The lieutenant governor runs Texas, but the person who really runs the lieutenant governor is the Speaker of the House. So we figured that out. It took us 6 months to figure it out. And I'm from Texas in a sense. I went to high school there. And bingo, we got Texas once we figured it out and got the speaker on our side. Every state is different. And that's our strength and our weakness.
I'll make a comment, and that is in my book about Saddam. He wasn't funding suicide bombers, but you can be led to believe that he was helping the families of suicide bombers. In other words, once that happened or whatever, he took care of the families. And that was one of the reasons our government in Israel disliked Saddam. They used as rationale what he was paying. He was actually taking care of the families, after they did that. The other reason against Saddam, too, he was helping fund Hamas as well. So that's why we're trying to take him out.
And the greatest helper of Hamas for the last 15 years has been Bibi Netanyahu. And he's now in trouble because those payments he was getting the Emir and Qatar to give to Hamas, he was taking a cut.
And the reason he was funding is to keep the Palestinians apart from one another.
Yeah.
He was
Because
playing
the
that
Palestinian
game.
Authority wanted a two-state solution.
Right.
Hamas doesn't. Ally yourself with Hamas.
Exactly. My enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
Last question for tonight will go to Community Churches. Dean Stevens.
It's amazing to me that we are looking at two Republicans that worked in the Bush administration.
Well, let me stop you there now. Wait a minute. Let me stop you there.
That's why this guy had more sense.
I have a joke about this, right? Okay.
Please.
I said, listen, this is where the world should be. Okay. You got a white guy, Republican from South Carolina. You got a black guy, traditional Democrat, even though I call myself an independent Democrat because I don't like a lot of things that Democrats do. I just have to do it because I want to vote in a primary election, but I'm an independent Democrat. So you got a white guy and you got an officer and a gentleman, yeah. And so, but we've come together for the greater cause. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Salt and pepper.
Yeah. There you go.
It's amazing. Thank you for that book. I've read through half of it, and the story about George Bush's Freudian slip non sequitur is worth the price of the book.
Check that out in there. He told on himself. Yeah.
So here's my question. I was out of commission for about 3 weeks in hospital, and thank you for your service to hospitals and presence there. I have been trying to catch up with old news when there's so much new news coming at you that it's really hard to do that. But I had in front of me an article in the New York Times from end of February about, I'm sure you know who this is, C.Q. Jones.
Brown?
C.Q. Brown. C.Q. Brown. And the article was that he was fired. He was a highly decorated 4-star general. And why was he fired? Because too much DEI or something like that. In the same article, there was a woman in the Navy also fired for the same thing.
She was the chief of naval operations. She was in charge of the Navy.
Yeah. Donald Trump saying, I'm firing you because you're a black guy. I'm firing you because you're a woman. And basically that's what this article interpreted it as.
He just fired a woman who's a Jew too. That's going to backfire. He's going to be gotten for anti-Semitism.
It never stops. Just maybe a commentary about race in the military, and it's traditionally been a great vehicle for all kinds of people of color and people from rural areas to advance and join the middle class. But such deep racism from the commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
Well, many of these people who are being tracked by the Customs and Border Patrol on military reservations, their husbands, in some cases, their wives, the military member, and in some rare cases, both of them are military members, are serving for their citizenship. And now they're vulnerable to being tossed out of the country because of this, CPB, I'm going to get you. If you're not a citizen already, you're gone.
Let me comment on that. I know CQ Brown. I served as the senior enlisted leader out in the Pacific in 1998 to 2000. And CQ Brown, the year before COVID, invited myself and other commanders, my boss at the time, General Myers, who was the chairman during the war, Iraq War, invited us over to the Pacific for updated briefings. And I sat on a board up until 2012, 22 with CQ Brown. So I got a chance to see him up close. And a very qualified individual. Now, I want to crack a joke. This is just a joke here now. But I was considered, you know, with my book, I appeared on Judge Paolo's show as well a couple of times. And he asked me that question you asked me about CQ Brown and DEI. Boy, did the maggots come out. I went from a so-called darling of the show to a DEI chief, you know, at DEI. But let me just tell you about this. I just want to give a quick story. I know we're running out of time. And I said, so from our families and friends, you don't know what you don't know. I didn't learn about this. I got in the Pentagon and worked around these neocons and Zionists and so forth. And likewise, if you haven't been through it, I laugh and joke, but it's a serious matter. As far as I know, my first job as a senior leader of an entire installation back in, before we even knew about a DEI, was 1993. And I was hired to go to Yokota Air Base, Japan, for those who've been in the military. I said, you know what? I look back on it now. I was a DEI hire. And that was a good thing. Now, let me tell you why. I was the most junior person of those who've been in the military, of the E9s, of the sergeant majors, the master chiefs, the chiefs and all that. And I got hired into this job because the commander who knew me happened to be white. And my wife always wanted to go to Japan. I said, hey, you know, if you become the commander, I'm going to come over there and be your senior guy, you know, enlisted guy. And it happened. And he called me and said, I want you to come over to Japan because I know you. But the reason he wanted me to come over, he said, I have racism on my base. You ready for this, Omar? I have racism in the military. We call it the chapel. I have racism in my church, the chapel. And I need you to come over here so the blacks on this base will know I don't stand for that. And I need you to help me clear that up. And we did. I don't care if I was a so-called a DEI chief. I was qualified for the job, and I did the job. You follow what I'm saying? Now, why did I say that? Whether we like it or not, I looked at Larry and I stuff. I said our backgrounds, I love people for who they are, no matter what race, religion, or whatever the case may be. But we do have racism. That's a fact. And I hate to tell this, as I tell folks, you know, my Jewish friends, I said, y'all need to be out there. And I said, you know, they're out there more on the Palestinian. I said, y'all need to be the ones speaking even louder. And I tell my white friends, you know who the racist folks are because some of them are your friends and family, and you need to call them out on that. And so when we talk about DEI and all that, it's a good thing because of the fact we all come from different backgrounds. We all need to serve our country, but we need to feel like we're going to be rewarded accordingly, no matter where we come from. And I can tell you, there was racism in the service. I experienced it. I had some commanders that called me the black racist chief. I was surprised at that. They even filed what we call social actions, a complaint against me, because I wouldn't let them use their racism against blacks. So I told them to do an investigation of all three of those commanders and myself to see who's come out smelling like a rose. And the deputy commander of that installation said, you know what? I see more white folks coming in to see Chief Fritz than anybody. Now, guess what? Two of those commanders got fired because it came back what was happening to their unit. One of those commanders came back and apologized to me. You know why he apologized to me? He thought he was being punished. Unfortunately, his wife died out of nowhere. And he blamed himself for his racism and trying to say I was a racist. He came and apologized to me. He cried on my shoulder. Did I forgive him? Of course I did. And so when we talk about DEI, when we talk about CQ Brown, I will tell you, and I told this, I put this out. I told some folks, I said, like I said, I probably won't be welcome back on the judge's show again, you know, but I want you to think about this for a moment. If I was a female, or if I was the parent of a female, and somebody's going to fire me because they think I didn't deserve to be an admiral in the military, I wouldn't send my child to the military. If I'm a black, CQ Brown was very qualified for that job. If you go and look at everything, but because he supported DEI, diversity, inclusion, we should all want that. But it should be on our merits as well. Now, you got to be careful. It got to be on the merits too. But I must tell you, as a person of color, I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've had friends that come and tell me, hey, be careful of this person because they're, you know. And so it is important, but we got to make sure we don't overdo it too. You know, like I said, if Larry and I are both qualified for the job, I expect Larry to get the job, no matter his race. But I don't want him to get the job because they didn't understand me, because they stereotyped me as a black man. I may have been qualified for the job, but I didn't get it because the boss felt more comfortable with Larry. So we got to balance that out, and we got to come together. I don't care who you are. I love myself some Larry Wilkerson. And we come from different backgrounds.
And we're all human. And
We're all human.
Powell used to say to the Secretary of the Army occasionally when he'd get his dander up, you have to have affirmative action. And the Secretary of the Army would say, no, we don't. And Powell would say, if you don't have affirmative action, or whatever you want to call it, if you don't make sure that before every promotion board, black colonels, for example, are included at roughly the percentage they constitute in the military, you aren't going to get any black generals. And if you don't get any black generals, it's going to look really bad to all those blacks that are out there in the ranks, and there's no black generals. So let's face it, Mr. Secretary, you are going to have to tell that board to approve some black colonels until it becomes a factor non-existent. And then you can go with everything that you want to go with. Merit and talent has to be forced sometimes. It has to be forced. And he would use his own examples. And when he was in ADC in the 4th Mech Division out in Colorado, for example, he got a terrible OER, officer efficiency rating. The guy didn't like him. His name was Sudacek, and he was a racist. He was a white racist 2-star general. And he gave Powell a really bad OER that for anybody else in the Army would have killed him. The Secretary of the Army found out about it and tore up the OER. Affirmative action? Well, it saved a really good man. You've got to have some interference sometimes when the society is set up to appreciate more one race over another until you conquer it. And, you know.
And what a quick example. At home, for those of us that are sports now, use a sports analogy. At one time, it was stated that a black could not be a quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
Think about that. Stereotyping, didn't have the brain power. But look now, we got the chance, and you have a lot of black.
And now we're all scared.
Somebody say something? Oh.
Is that asking you to say something?
You see how many white men are in the Celtics?
Oh. Back then, yeah, exactly. But anyway, I just use that as an example. So programs like that are designed to give you the person the opportunity that would not had the opportunity in the past. So we know they exist. Now, like I said, you got to be careful not to overdo it because of the fact, I don't want you, this to be good. I was in the running for the top enlisted position of the entire Air Force. Because there had only been one at the time for the entire history of the Air Force, the blacks were coming to me, oh, we're praying that you get it. You know what I told them? And I really meant that. And they'll tell you, come and say, wow. I said, do not wish for me to have that job because I'm black. You wish me to have that job because I'm the most qualified. Think about that. And so that's why we just have to balance out to make sure people are getting their fair chance. So you need these programs, whether you like it or not, there's racist people in this world. Okay? All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Fritz. Thank you, Colonel Wilkerson. Thank you all, everyone. Again, we have copies of Deadly Betrayal for sale, and Chief Fritz is available to sign those copies.
Yeah, if you get, I'll look more than happy to sign it. Please.
The final words of tonight's event will go to the president of our board of directors of Community Church, Miss Sandra Harris. So let's welcome Sandra up here to close off tonight's program.
Thank you, Amar. Thank you, our speakers tonight, because they have been very enlightening. And my name is Sandra Harris. I am the president of the Community Church of Boston. And as you know, this is a church that holds 105 years of history, yes. 105 years of struggles. And when you were mentioning a lot of these things tonight, I feel so proud to belong to a church that actually was part of the movement before actually got their identity, before gay rights, before affirmative action, before everything, we were there. And we have been a sanctuary for many different projects. So this is a church that if you have an hour in the month, come and visit us, because you will learn so many things about it. We have like 5 floors. One is commercial, which that's another conversation for another day. But we have so many histories. We have at least 3 libraries. We have a Bob Datilio library, which is one of the scholars more prominent about the Sacco and Vanzetti, that actually has the more comprehensive history about immigrant rights when you are talking about labor rights. And then we have now some books from our dear friend John Livingston, which just passed, and we hold her dearly. And it's a person that had contributed so much to this church. And then we also have our own archive history in the 5th floor that still have a lot of work, but we have like 105 years of history. You can imagine, we have speeches in writing, we have in recordings. What is the old format that we have? Like yes, okay. So you can imagine how many generations we have here. So that's precisely what I would love to encourage everyone here to come and join us and discover what is the history of this church. Because no, we are not just at Copley Square. Copley Square has been a struggle, and if you know a little bit about the history of Boston, as we were hearing from Dickens. Sorry, I'm very bad with names. But yes, thank you. We will know that there are so many layers upon layers upon layers, and there is no one single history. And that's what we want to know. That you understand that we are a very complex institution, and we invite you to become part of us.